Since the basic purpose of any car is to transport people from one place to another, it seems logical that the more seats a particular model has, the better, right? Well, if you're the sort who likes to ferry around half the bloody population, maybe. But who wants to be a taxi service? The way things have turned out, though, many cars have had relatively few seats, and we're going to focus on those which, for one reason or another, have had only two, the proper sporty amount. Now, before you start banging on about your mate's auntie's hairdresser's dog who had a Fiat Cinquecento with a bench seat, let me stop you right there. We're talking proper two-seaters, none of that three in the front malarkey. From many possible candidates, so apologies if your favorite happens to have missed the cut. We've created an alphabetical list of 36, all of which were in production before the year 2000. Buckle up, because we're off on a high-octane history lesson, and some of these might just surprise you. Ah, the Alfa Romeo Spider. Picture this. Italian Riviera, sunshine glinting off the Mediterranean, a winding coastal road, and you hair blowing in the wind behind the wheel of this beauty. The Spider was basically the automotive equivalent of Sophia Loren's stunningly gorgeous and full of Italian passion. It was based on the Giulia Saloon, but frankly, it was light years ahead in the looks department. And the best part, it lasted longer than your average boy band, staying in production from 1966 to 1994. Now that's what I call stamina. And under the bonnet, the legendary Alfa Romeo twin-cam engine. It wasn't always powerful, but by God, it sounded glorious. Now, some cars are named after places that sound like they were made up by a marketing department on a bender, not the Aston Martin Le Mans. This thing was named after the most grueling race in motorsport, and for good reason. Back in 1932, Aston Martin rocked up to Le Mans and showed everyone how it's done, finishing a respectable 5th overall and first in their class. To celebrate, they decided to name their new car after the race. Sensible, really. They only made about 100 of these beauties, and some lucky sods even got an extra pair of seats. Not that they needed them, of course. Right, let's be honest, the Austin Healey Sprite wasn't exactly what you'd call a looker. In fact, with those headlights sticking out like a surprised frog, it was a bit of an oddball, but that's what we loved about it. It was small, it was nippy, and it was as British as a cuppa and a digestive biscuit. The Sprite was the love child of Austin and Donald Healey, and for 20 years they churned out these little beauties. They were always powered by the BMC A-series engine, which was about as reliable as the Queen turning up for a polo match. And they say good things come in small packages. Now, when you think of a two-seater, you probably picture two seats side by side, right? Well, Robert Bourbeau, the mastermind behind the Bedelia, clearly didn't get that memo. This car was about as aerodynamic as a brick, and the seats were in tandem. Yes, you heard that right. One in front of the other, like you were off on a romantic bicycle ride for two. It was bonkers, but somehow it worked. Sadly, the Bedelia didn't last beyond the 1920s. Everyone bangs on about the Benz patent motorwagon being the first car, and yes, it was a momentous achievement, but let's be honest, it was about as practical as a chocolate teapot. Enter the Benz Velo, the unsung hero of early motoring. This was the first car to be mass-produced, and they shifted over 1,200 of them between 1894 and 1901. It was powered by a single-cylinder engine, which doesn't sound like much, but back then it was like strapping a rocket to a shopping trolley. Chapter 7, suggested item 7 to... Chapter 8, suggested item 8 Chapter 9, suggested item 9 us. Chapter 10, suggested item 10. Now let's dive into this fascinating recommendation. Chapter 11, suggested item 11. This is another intriguing suggestion that you won't want to miss. Chapter 12, suggested item 12. And finally, we have this last, but certainly not least, recommendation. Chapter 13, suggested item 13. Chapter 14, suggested item 14. Chapter 15, suggested item 15. Chapter 16, suggested item 16. Chapter 17, suggested item 17. Chapter 18, suggested item 18. Chapter 19, suggested item 19, media keywords. Chapter 20, suggested item 20, media keywords. Chapter 21, suggested item 21, media keywords. Chapter 22, suggested item 22. Chapter 23, suggested item 23. Chapter 24, suggested item 24. Chapter 25, suggested item 25. Chapter 26, suggested item 26. Chapter 27, suggested item 27. Chapter 28, suggested item 28. Chapter 29, suggested item 29. Chapter 30, suggested item 30. Chapter 31, suggested item 31. Chapter 32, suggested item 32. Chapter 33, suggested item 33. Chapter 34, suggested item 34. Chapter 35, suggested item 35. Chapter 36, suggested item 36. So, there you have it, folks. 36 classic two-seaters that'll make you wish you'd invested in a garage the size of Belgium. We've had everything from Italian stallions to British bulldogs, and even a tandem oddity that would make a Reliant Robin look conventional. Now, I know what you're thinking. Clarkson, you've missed out my favourite. And you know what? You're probably right. There are more two-seater sports cars out there than there are potholes on the M25. But this list was about celebrating the icons, the legends, the ones that made you want to rip your hair out and shout, "I need to drive that." So, next time you're stuck in traffic behind a minivan with enough kids to field a football team, just remember these beauties. They're a reminder that sometimes less is definitely more.